Ethan Caldwell's fingers flew across the stems of a bouquet, his practiced hands weaving together a tapestry of colors and scents. The sweet aroma of lilies mingled with the earthy scent of fresh-cut greenery, filling the air of his small flower shop in downtown Whitefish, Montana, as he put the finishing touches on the arrangement. He was putting the finishing touches on the arrangement above the door when he heard a chime. He looked up and saw Mrs. Henderson, one of his regular customers. "Good morning, Mrs. Henderson," he said. "Your usual Friday bouquet?" The elderly woman nodded and smiled. "You know me so well," she replied. "And how's that lovely family of yours, Ethan?" Ethan's chest swelled with pride. "They're wonderful. Thank you for asking." Lauren's gearing up for the new school year and Mason's excited about starting kindergarten. As he wrapped Mrs. Henderson's bouquet, Ethan's mind wandered to his wife and son. He had it all: a thriving business, a beautiful family, and a peaceful life in this picturesque mountain town. Later that evening, Ethan locked up the shop and headed home. The summer sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows across the quiet streets. He pulled into the driveway of their modest two-bedroom house. Ethan arrived home to find Lauren and Mason in the kitchen, laughing together. They were dusting flour off their chins as they rolled out cookie dough. Ethan's son, Mason, was squealing with delight, abandoning his task to run into his dad's arms. Ethan scooped up his son, planting a kiss on his forehead. Kiss on his flour-covered forehead. "Hey, buddy, what are you two up to?" Lauren wiped her hands on her apron and came over to give Ethan a quick peck on the lips. "We're making cookies for the end-of-summer picnic at school tomorrow. Want to join us for a moment?" Taking in the scene, his beautiful wife, her honey-blonde hair tied back in a messy bun, smiled at him with those warm brown eyes. His son, a perfect mix of them both, giggled in his arms. This was happiness, he thought. This was everything he'd ever wanted. "I wouldn't miss it for the world," he said, setting Mason down and rolling up his sleeves. They spent the evening baking in the kitchen, filled with the sweet scent of vanilla and the sound of their laughter as they worked. Lauren told him about her day at school, preparing her classroom for the incoming first graders. "I think this might be my best year yet," she said. Her eyes were bright with excitement. "I've got some new ideas for the reading corner, and I can't wait to meet my new students." Ethan loved seeing her so passionate about her work. It was one of the things that had first drawn him to her, that infectious enthusiasm for life and learning. After they put Mason to bed, Ethan and Lauren settled on the porch swing in the cool evening breeze, rustling the leaves of the maple tree in their front yard. Lauren curled into his side, her head resting on his shoulder. Ethan said his arm was around her waist. "Maybe we could take a weekend trip soon. Just the three of us, up to Glacier National Park and do some hiking in the mountains." Lauren tilted her head up to look at him, a soft smile on her lips. "That sounds perfect," she said. Ethan leaned down to kiss her, enjoying the moment. "I love you too," he murmured against her lips as they sat there wrapped in each other's arms. Ethan felt a sense of contentment wash over him. This was his life, filled with love, laughter, and simple pleasures. He couldn't imagine wanting anything more. A week later, Ethan was arranging a display of sunflowers in the shop window when the bell chimed. He turned to see Kyle Morrison, his oldest friend, walking in. Something about Kyle's expression made Ethan's smile falter. "Kyle," Ethan said, wiping his hands on his apron, "what brings you by?" Kyle ran a hand through his dark hair. His usual easygoing demeanor was replaced by an uncharacteristic tension. "I've got a minute to talk, man." Ethan nodded, leading Kyle to the small office in the back of the shop. He pulled out 2 chairs and gestured for Kyle to sit. Ethan gestured towards 2 chairs and asked Kyle to sit. Kyle sat down slowly, his shoulders hunched up. He didn't meet Ethan's eyes. Ethan's stomach was in a knot as he began to tell Kyle about what he'd seen. "Kyle and I have known each other since we were kids, and I've never seen him this serious." "Okay," he said slowly. "What did you see?" Kyle took a deep breath, then finally looked up at Ethan. "I saw Lauren at the Stillwater coffee shop today." Ethan's brow furrowed. "I think it was Troy Bennett, who works at her school. Lauren has male colleagues. What's the big deal?" Kyle's voice was low, as if he was afraid someone might overhear. They weren't just having coffee. They were holding hands. The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. He felt the air leave his lungs and his mind reeling. "No, that's not possible. You must have seen wrong," he thought. But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't true. Kay wouldn't make this up or say something like this unless I was sure of it. I wish I hadn't seen what I saw. They were sitting in a corner, booth heads close together. When they got up to leave, they were holding hands. It wasn't friendly, it was intimate. Ethan stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. He paced the small office, his mind racing. "No," he muttered. "No, Lauren wouldn't do that. We're happy. We have Mason. She loves me." Kyle stayed seated, watching his friend with concern. "I'm sorry, F. I really am, but I thought you needed to know." He paced the small office, his mind racing. He knew Lauren wouldn't do that. They were happy, and they had Mason. She loved him. Kyle stayed seated, watching his friend with concern. He was sorry, F. He really was, but he thought Ethan needed to know. Ethan stopped. Pacing up and down, Ethan braced his hands on the desk. He felt like he might be sick. "How long were you watching them?" he asked. "About 20 minutes, Kyle replied. "I was getting coffee to go, and I saw them when I walked in. I couldn't leave. I had to be sure before I told you." Ethan nodded, not trusting himself. Ethan was at a loss. He felt like his world was crumbling around him, and he didn't know how to stop it. Kyle asked softly, "What are you going to do?" Ethan straightened up, his jaw set. "I'm going to talk to Lauren. There has to be an explanation for this. There has to be. Shoulder. I'm here if you need me, man." "Whatever happens." Ethan nodded, grateful for his friend's support, even as his mind reeled from the information. As Kyle left, Ethan sank back into his chair, trying to make sense of what he just learned. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Ethan went through the motions of running the shop, but his mind was elsewhere. He kept replaying Kyle's words in his head, trying to find some other explanation. No matter how he looked at it, he couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal that evening. Ethan drove home Over the next few days, the familiar streets of Whitefish seemed strange and unfamiliar. It was as if the whole world had shifted on its axis. He pulled into the driveway and killed the engine, but didn't get out of the car right away. Through the living room window, he could see Lauren moving around, probably getting dinner ready. Everything looked normal and perfect. How could it all be a lie? Finally, he forced himself to go inside. The smell of lasagna, his favorite, filled the air, and he could hear Mason chattering away in the kitchen. For a moment, Ethan hesitated in the entryway, wondering if he thought he should just pretend everything was fine, but the weight of Kyle's words pressed down on him, demanding answers. "Lauren," he called out, his voice sounding strange to his own ears. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" "Sweetie," she called over her shoulder, "can you set the table for dinner? Mommy and Daddy need to talk for a minute." Once they were alone, Ethan turned to face his wife, the woman he loved for over a decade, the mother of his child. He searched her face, looking for any sign of guilt or deception, but all he saw was concern. "Ethan, you're scaring me," Lauren said, reaching out to touch his arm. Lauren's eyes widened, but then she let out a small laugh. "That's ridiculous. I was at school all day. Don't lie to me," she said. "Kyle wouldn't make this up. I saw you," Ethan said, his voice low and strained. "You're going to believe Kyle over your own wife? Is that it?" Ethan ran a hand through his hair, frustration building. "I don't want to believe it, Lauren, but Kyle's my oldest friend. He wouldn't tell me something like this unless he was absolutely sure." "Well, he's wrong, Lauren," snapped I. "I don't know what he saw, but it wasn't me. I was at school preparing for the new year. You can call and check if you don't believe me." Ethan studied her, wanting to believe her. But something in her eyes and the set of her jaw made him hesitate. "Lauren, please. There's something going on. Just tell me and we can work through it." Lauren's face softened, and she stepped closer to him. "Ethan, nothing is going on. I love you, and I love our family. Why would I risk that?" She reached up to Cup's face, touching his cheek with her own. It was a moment of familiarity and comfort. Ethan wanted to believe her and forget about everything Kyle had told him, but he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it. He said softly, "I want to believe you, Lauren. I really do." He stepped back, ending the contact. "I need some time to think," he said. "I'm going for a walk." "Ethan, please," Lauren called after him, but he was already heading for the door. "Tell Mason I'll be back for dinner," he said over his shoulder, not looking back as he walked through the quiet streets of their neighborhood. Ethan's mind was in turmoil. He wanted to believe Lauren, and wanted to trust in the life they'd built together, but Kyle's words echoed in his head, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. In the following weeks, the atmosphere in the Caldwell household became increasingly tense. Lauren became distant, often staying late at school or going out with colleagues in the evenings. Ethan found himself watching her closely, looking for any sign that Kyle had been right. One night, as they lay in bed, Ethan turned to Lauren and asked quietly, "Are you happy?" Lauren was silent for a long moment, and then she said, "Of course I'm happy," but her voice lacked conviction. "Why wouldn't I be?" Ethan didn't respond. He just turned away and pretended to sleep. But as he lay there, in the dark, Ethan listened to Lauren's breathing. He couldn't shake the feeling that their perfect life was starting to unravel. Ethan stood in the flower shop, mechanically arranging a bouquet of red roses. His mind, however, was far from the task at hand. The past few weeks had been a blur of suspicion and growing unease. Lauren's late nights at school had become more frequent, and the warmth between them had all but disappeared. The bell above the door chimed, and Ethan looked up to see Kim in his friend's face. Matching Ethan's mood, he said, "Hey, fuck." He approached the counter. "How are you holding up?" Ethan set down the roses. His shoulders slumped. "Not great. I can't shake this feeling that something's wrong." "You think so?" "Lauren's been different." Kyle leaned against the counter. Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. He tried talking to her about it again, but she'd got defensive every time. She'd said he was being paranoid, and that he should trust her. Kyle asked, his eyes searching Ethan's face. Ethan was a long, awkward silence. "I want to, but I can't." Kyle finished for him. Ethan nodded, feeling a mix of guilt and anger wash over him. "I need to know for sure, Kyle. This uncertainty is killing me." Kyle straightened up, a determined look on his face. "What if I keep an eye on her for you?" Ethan's head snapped up. "What do you mean?" "I could follow her, see where she goes, who she meets, get you the proof you need." One way or the other, for a moment, Ethan hesitated. It felt wrong, spying on her. Wife. But then he remembered the coldness in their bed, the secretive phone calls, the late nights. He nodded slowly. "Okay," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Do it over the next few days." Kay kept Ethan updated on Lauren's movements. Each report felt like a knife twisting in Ethan's gut. She met Troy for coffee again. He called her one evening and they sat close, talking for over an hour. Maybe it was just a work meeting, Ethan said, but his voice lacked conviction. Another day, another call. They had dinner together. At that new Italian place, Kentucky reported Ethan. They were holding hands across the table, Ethan's free hand clenched into a fist. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure. Sorry." The final straw came on a Friday afternoon. Ethan was closing up the shop when his phone rang. It was. Kyle and Ethan sounded urgent. "Ethan, you need to come right now. Lauren and Troy just checked into the Whitefish Mountain Lodge together. I'm here at the hotel. You need to see this for yourself." Before hanging up, he managed to say, "I'll be right there." As he drove to the hotel, a cold, angry knot formed in his chest. He'd been a fool. He realized he'd been blind and trusting. Well, no more. It was time to face the truth, no matter how painful. Pulling into the hotel parking lot, his hands shaking as he turned off the engine, Ethan saw Kyle waiting for him near the entrance. Kyle's face was a mask of concern. "Are you sure you want to do this?" he asked as Ethan approached. Ethan's jaw clenched. "I have to know," he said, his voice hard. "Which room?" Kentucky replied, "Ethan, maybe we should." Ethan was already striding towards the hotel entrance. He was angry and determined. He took the stairs two at a time, not willing to wait for the elevator. When he reached the third floor, he paused, taking a deep breath to steady himself. Room 315 stood before him, seemingly harmless yet ominous. Ethan raised his hand and knocked, the sound reverberating in the quiet hallway. After a moment, there was silence. Then he heard movement inside the room. The door opened, and there stood Lauren, her face pale as she saw him. "Ethan," she gasped. "What are you doing here?" Ethan's eyes met hers, intense and piercing. He was looking for any sign of the woman he thought he knew. "Where are you?" he demanded, his voice low and dangerous. Lauren's eyes darted nervously. "What are you talking about?" "There's no one here." "Don't lie to me," Ethan shouted, pushing past her into the room. "Troy, I know you're here. You coward!" He stormed through the room, throwing open closet doors and checking. Lauren followed him under the bed. Her voice was high and panicked. "Ethan, please, you're not thinking clearly. Let's just go home and talk about this." But Ethan wasn't listening. As he approached the bathroom door, He heard a faint sound from inside. His hand closed around the doorknob, but it was locked. Ethan called out, his voice shaking with Ethan was barely holding it together. "Open it now or I swear I'll break it down." Lauren grabbed his arm. "Ethan, stop. This is crazy." He gave her a look that said he wasn't going to back down. "Troy, come out now or I'm coming in." There was no response. Ethan took a step back with a roar of anger and pain. He kicked the door. It splintered under the force. Ethan's blow sent the door swinging open to reveal Troy cowering in the bathtub. The room was silent except for their heavy breathing. Then Troy spoke, his voice trembling. "I can explain," he said. "Explain how you've been screwing my wife. Explain how you've been destroying my family." He took a menacing step towards Troy, his fists clenched. Troy backed away from the tub until he hit the wall. "Please," he whimpered. "We never meant for this to happen. It just happened." Ethan laughed a harsh, bitter sound. "Is that supposed to make it okay?" He turned to Lauren, who was standing in the doorway, tears streaming down her face. "How long?" he demanded. Lauren couldn't meet his eyes. "Ethan, I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you." "How long?" Ethan repeated each word like a hammer, his voice barely above a whisper. 6 years. The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. 6 years, their entire marriage, every moment, every memory is tainted by this betrayal. He turned back. Troy's voice was cold and furious. "Run," he growled. "Get out now before I do something I might regret." Troy's eyes darted between Ethan and Lauren, panic evident on his face. Without warning, he bolted from the bathroom, pushing past Lauren. Ethan followed, propelled by his anger. "You coward," he shouted, advancing on Troy. "You destroy my family. And now you run, Troy." His eyes wild with fear, he backed away towards the window. "Stay back," he yelled, his voice shaking. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Before either Ethan or Lauren could react, Troy turned and threw himself at the window. The glass shattered with a deafening crash, and Troy disappeared from view. Lauren screamed, rushing to the broken window. Ethan stood frozen in shock for a moment, before joining Lauren at the window. He looked down and saw Troy's crumpled form on top of a parked car 3 stories below. "Oh God," Lauren sobbed, covering her mouth. "We need to call an ambulance," Ethan said, his mind reeling. He could hear sirens approaching. He'd probably already called. He turned to Lauren. His voice was cold despite the chaos. "This is on you both." Lauren reached for him. Her face was streaked with tears. "Ethan, please. I never meant for any of this to happen." Ethan jerked away from her touch. "Don't touch me. Don't speak to me. We're done." He turned and walked away. Ethan left the room, leaving Lauren sobbing behind him. As he stepped into the hallway, he saw Kyle waiting anxiously. "Fuck," Kyle started. But Ethan held up a hand to stop him. "Not now," he said. "I need to be alone." Without another word, Ethan walked away. The sound of approaching sirens grew louder with each step, as if he was being pulled further and further away from the Ethan thought he had a life ahead of him. But the next few days passed in a blur. He moved through his routines mechanically, opening and closing the flower shop, but his mind was elsewhere. Every memory and moment of his married life was tainted by betrayal. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the police showed up at the shop. The shop, 2 officers, their faces grim, asked to speak with him privately in the back office. The older of the 2 officers cleared his throat. "Mr. Caldwell, we're here about an incident involving Troy Bennett. He's in the hospital in critical condition. We understand you were there when he jumped from the window at the Whitefish Mountain Lodge last." On Friday, Ethan nodded slowly and spoke in a steady voice. "Yes, I was there. I found my wife there with him. We had words, but I never touched him. He panicked and jumped. After I told him to leave, the officers exchanged glances. We'll need a full statement from you, Mr. Caldwell. I'm afraid we'll have to ask you to come down to the station." Ethan gave a full account of what happened that day, including his confrontation with Troy and Lauren, the years of deception, and Troy's desperate leap from the window. He said he was angry, but he never threatened physical violence. He just told Troy to leave. The officers took his statement and asked a few more questions before letting him go with a warning to stay in town. As Ethan left the station, he felt a strange sense of relief. The truth was out now, for better or worse. When he got home, he found Lauren waiting for him. She stood as he entered, her eyes red and puffy from crying. Lauren began, her voice trembling. "I heard about Troy, The police came by and saved it. Ethan cut her off, his voice cold. I don't want to hear anything you have to say. Lauren flinched at his tone but pressed on. Please, Ethan. We need to talk about this. About us. About Mason. At the mention of their son's name, Ethan felt a fresh wave of pain wash over him. Mason, he said softly. God, Lauren, how could you do this to him, to us? His hair was a mess, and he was clearly frustrated. I thought we shared a lot, but it seems like it was all a lie. How am I supposed to trust you now? Lauren's voice was small and broken. I do love you, Ethan. That wasn't a lie. Ethan stopped pacing and stared at her. If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this. You wouldn't have betrayed me or our family. He took a deep breath and collected himself for what he had to say next. I want a divorce. I can't live like this, wondering and doubting every word and every action. Lauren gasped and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. Ethan, please, we can work this out. Think about Mason. I am thinking about Mason, Ethan interrupted. I'm thinking about what kind of example we'd be setting if we stayed together after this, living a lie and pretending everything's okay when it's not. He paused, a terrible thought occurring to him. Lauren, he said slowly, is Mason even? Lauren's face drained of color. She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again, looking away. Ethan felt as if the floor had dropped out from under him. Oh my God, he whispered. Is he not? Lauren's silence was all the confirmation he needed. Ethan stumbled back, gripping the edge of the counter for support. Get out, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Get out of my house. Ethan said it again, this time with more force. Get out, he roared. His composure finally broke. Lauren flinched, then slowly gathered her purse at the door. She turned back and said softly, I'll be at my sister's. When you're ready to talk, I won't be. We're done, Lauren. This is it. Goodbye. The door closed behind her. Ethan sank to the floor, his back against the kitchen cabinets. He was overwhelmed by the weight of everything. The betrayal, the lies, the loss of the son he thought was his. For the first time since this nightmare began, he allowed himself to break down and cry. Ethan was tempted to break down and cry. The morning sun streamed through the windows of Ethan's kitchen, but it brought no warmth to the man sitting at the table, staring blankly at his untouched coffee. A week had passed since Lauren's confession, but the pain and anger still burned as fresh as ever. The sound of the doorbell jolted Ethan from his thoughts. He opened the door to find a courier holding a small package. Ethan took it. He thanked the courier and went back to the kitchen. He opened the envelope and took out a single sheet of paper with the DNA test results on it. He read them carefully, taking a deep breath to steady himself. He already suspected the truth, but the document confirmed it. He was shocked. Mason, the boy he'd loved and raised for 5 years, wasn't his son. Another lie. Another betrayal. The phone rang, cutting through the silence. Lauren's name flashed on the screen. Ethan hesitated, then answered. What do you want? He asked. Lauren, he said, please. We need to talk about Mason, about us. There is no us anymore. Ethan cut her off. I just got, he said. The DNA results showed that he wasn't the father. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Lauren, Ethan said angrily. Is he? No, she finally whispered. I'm so sorry. I never meant to hurt you. I never meant to hurt you, Ethan. I'm so sorry. It's over. Lauren, what about Mason? He loves you, Ethan. You're the only father he's ever known. Those words brought Hune's not my son. Lauren, you made sure of that. I can't be in his life anymore. It's better this way. Ethan, no, Lauren cried. You can't just abandon him. He's innocent in all this. I'm not abandoning him, Ethan said, his voice hard. I'm leaving him with his mother and his real father. Goodbye, Lauren. He stood up, setting his jaw. It was time to end this chapter of his life for good. The next morning, Ethan found himself in the office of Jack Reynolds, the best divorce lawyer in Whitefish. The office was sleek and modern, a stark contrast to the turmoil in Ethan's mind. So, Mr. Caldwell, Jack said, leaning back in his leather chair, you want to file for divorce on what grounds? Ethan's laugh was bitter. How about adultery? My wife's been cheating on me for our entire marriage, 6 years of lies. Jack nodded, his expression sympathetic but professional. I see and I understand there's a child involved. A child that isn't mine, Ethan said, sliding the DNA test results across the desk. I want a clean break, Jack. I don't want anything to do with Lauren or Mason. Jack raised an eyebrow. Are you sure about that, Mr. Caldwell? The court might still consider you the legal father regardless of biology. You could potentially. Ethan shook his head firmly. I want Lauren to have full custody. I can't be a father to a child that isn't mine. That's a constant reminder of her betrayal. Jack said, What about alimony? Given the circumstances, we might be able to argue against it. Ethan nodded. I don't want to give her a dime more than I have to. In fact, I want to make sure she walks away with as little as possible. Can we do that? Jack leaned forward, a glint in his eye. With what you've told me, we can do a lot more than that. We can make sure she feels the consequences of her actions. Are you prepared to play hardball? Ethan met the lawyer's gaze. His jaw set. I'm prepared to do whatever it takes. She destroyed my life. Jack, I want her to understand exactly what that means. Over the next few weeks, Ethan threw himself into the divorce proceedings with a single-minded focus. He focused his mind on the task at hand, listing every asset and every penny spent during their marriage. He gathered evidence of Lauren's affair, including statements from Kyle and hotel records when she tried to reach out to plead for a less aggressive approach. Ethan shut her down. Please, she begged during one phone call. This is destroying me. I can't afford. If you're going to fight me like this, you should have thought about that before you decided to cheat, Ethan replied, unmoved. You made your choice, Lauren. Now you get to live with it. What about Mason? Lauren asked, his voice breaking. He keeps asking for you. He doesn't understand why you won't see him for a moment. Ethan's resolve wavered. The thought of Mason confused him, and hurt tore at his heart. But then he remembered the DNA test, the years of lies, and his heart hardened again. Tell him whatever you want, Lauren, but I'm not going to pretend to be his father anymore. That's your burden to bear now. As he hung up, Ethan pushed down the guilt and pain, focusing instead on his plan. He would make sure Lauren understood. The real cost of her betrayal. Months passed, and the divorce proceedings continued. Ethan's flower shop was doing well, providing a much-needed distraction from his personal life. He threw himself into expanding the business, opening a second location in the neighboring town. One crisp autumn morning, Ethan sat in the courtroom. Lauren sat on the other side of the room, looking pale and drawn, as the judge delivered the final divorce decree in the case of Caldwell versus Caldwell. The judge began. This court grants the divorce on the grounds of adultery. Mr. Caldwell's petition for Mrs. Caldwell to receive no alimony is granted. The marital assets will be. Ethan listened with a grim satisfaction as the judge outlined the settlement. Thanks to Jack's skillful maneuvering, Lauren was walking away with barely enough to cover her legal fees. The house would be sold with Ethan receiving the majority of the proceeds. His business remained solely in his name as the judge finished. Ethan stood up. Buttoning up his suit jacket, he took one last look at Lauren. She sat slumped in her chair, tears streaming down her face. For a brief moment, he felt sorry for her. Then he remembered the years of lies, the depth of her betrayal, and the feeling faded. Outside the courthouse, Lauren caught up to him. Ethan, wait, she called out. He turned his face. Ethan was impassive. What is it, Lauren? I think the judge said everything that needs to be said. Lauren, you didn't mean that. Ethan, I know you. You're not this cruel. Ethan's laugh was harsh. You don't know me at all. The man you knew died the day I found out about your affair. This is who I am now, and you made me this way. He turned to leave, but Lauren's next words stopped him. Ethan froze when he heard that Troy had died last night. He was a mix of shocked, satisfied, and guilty. He pushed the feelings down and turned back to Lauren with a hard expression. I'm sorry for your loss, he said. His tone made it clear that he didn't feel sorry at all. I didn't feel sorry at all. I hope it was worth it, Lauren. I hope the affair was worth destroying everything we had. He walked away, leaving Lauren sobbing on the courthouse steps as he drove home. Ethan felt a weight lift from his shoulders. It was over. He was free. In the following weeks, news of a divorce spread. Ethan heard whispers and saw pitying looks, but he held his head high. He poured all his energy into his flower shop, expanding his business and building a new life for himself. Lauren, on the other hand, found her world crumbling around her. The story of her affair became public knowledge. In a small town like Whitefish, secrets don't stay secret for long. Lauren lost her job at the elementary school because the parents didn't want their kids taught by someone they saw as morally compromised. One day, as Ethan was closing up the shop, He saw Lauren across the street. She was walking quickly, her head down. Ethan ignored the stares and whispers of passers-by for a moment. Their eyes met, and he saw the pain and plea for forgiveness in her gaze. He turned away and locked the shop door with a decisive click. That night, as Ethan sat on his porch nursing a glass of whiskey, he allowed himself to think about Mason for the first time in months. He wondered how the boy was doing. Was he still asking about Ethan? Losing the child he thought was his son was still raw, but Ethan pushed it aside. He'd made his decision and he would stick to it as the years passed. Ethan's business continued to grow. He opened more shops in neighboring towns, building a small empire of flower shops across Montana. Ethan built an empire of flower shops across Montana. He dated casually, but never let himself get too close to anyone. The scars of Lauren's betrayal ran deep, and he was determined never to be that vulnerable again. Lauren's life, on the other hand, continued its downward spiral. She couldn't find work in Whitefish and eventually moved away. Ethan heard through the grapevine that Lauren was struggling to make ends meet, working multiple jobs to support herself and her son. It was a warm summer day, 5 years after the divorce. Ethan stood in his original shop, surveying the empire he'd built from his pain. The bell over the door chimed, and he turned to see a young boy enter, maybe 10 years old with Lauren's eyes but Troy's jaw and face. For a moment, Ethan's heart clenched with a mix of love and pain. "Can I help you?" he asked, keeping his voice neutral. Mason looked up at him, a mix of uncertainty and hope in his eyes. "Mr. Caldwell, I'm Mason. I don't know if you remember me, but I remember you." Ethan ran a hand through his hair. He'd known this day might come, but he'd hoped to avoid it. "Mason, it's complicated. There were adult things between your mother and me. Things that can't be fixed, but you were my dad. That everything would be okay." But he stopped himself from saying that. It wasn't his place to say. "I'm sorry, Mason. I'm not your father, but I think you should go home now." Mason's face fell, tears welling up in his eyes. He nodded once, then turned and ran out of the shop. He watched him go, ignoring the pain in his chest as he turned back to his work and arranged a bouquet of roses. Ethan thought about the path his life had taken. He'd lost the family he thought he had, but he'd gained something too. Independence, success, and the knowledge that he was strong enough to survive betrayal and come out stronger. Ethan had paid a high price for Lauren's deceit, but he'd made the right choice. He was now the master of his own life, surrounded by the sweet scent of flowers. He'd rebuilt his life from the ashes of his marriage. He knew he'd made the right choice. He was free from the weight of lies and betrayal. In that freedom, he'd found peace.